Welcome to Veiled Narrative Stories, where emotions unfold behind every veil of mystery and passion. Arav had always been ambitious, sharp suits, perfect manners, and a dream to rise in the corporate world. When he received the message that his new regional director was arriving, he could barely contain his excitement. Rumors said she was brilliant, unshakable, and impossibly sophisticated. To Arav, she represented everything he admired in leadership: confidence, intelligence, and control. That morning the office buzzed with curiosity. The lift opened and silence swept across the room. Every eye turned, and in walked her. She wasn't what anyone expected. She wore a flowing silk sari the color of midnight, its sheen soft against her golden skin, her long hair falling in gentle waves. It was elegant yet undeniably personal, the kind of attire that whispered of old-world grace in a modern world of gray suits. And for Arav it was disarming. He felt something stir. Not just admiration, but awe. Her name was Anaya Kapoor, and as she spoke her voice carried both command and calm. Every word felt deliberate, layered with depth and warmth. Arav watched, captivated not just by her beauty but by the aura she carried, poised yet untouchable, like the moon reflected on water. But as days passed, their paths began to cross. Late meetings, shared ideas, fleeting smiles over coffee. What began as admiration grew into something dangerous. There were moments, subtle glances, silences that lingered longer than they should. A spark both tried to hide behind professionalism. Then came the night of the company gala. Arav arrived early, nervous, expecting a formal event. But when Anaya entered, wearing a gown of deep emerald silk, every sound in the hall seemed to fade. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw not his boss, but the woman beneath the title. They danced once, slowly, wordlessly, surrounded by a crowd that didn't notice the storm building between them. Later that night, on the balcony under the city lights, she whispered, "You shouldn't look at me that way, Arav. It makes it harder for me to be who I need to be." He smiled, his voice trembling but honest. "And who do you need to be, Anaya? My boss, or the woman standing in front of me right now?" Her silence was an answer, one heavy with desire, fear, and the impossibility of their connection. But sometimes, fate doesn't wait for permission. A week later, they found themselves alone again. The air charged, the distance unbearable. And when she finally allowed herself to close that space, the world outside their moment ceased to exist. Yet love born in shadows must face the light someday. When rumors began to spread, and the board questioned her professionalism, Anaya stood her ground. But Arav knew the truth. She was risking everything she'd built for him. In the end, she made a choice. To protect his future, she resigned. Her final message was short. Some connections are not meant to last, only to awaken what's real within us. The years later, Arav would lead the same company. And every time he saw a woman in a midnight blue sari, he'd remember the woman who taught him that love, when pure, doesn't always need to end in forever. Sometimes, it's enough that it was real. The day had begun like any other Monday in the towering glass office of Sterling Enterprises. Polished floors reflecting ambition, the hum of whispered gossip, and the faint aroma of roasted espresso drifting through the air. But for Arav Malhotra, it wasn't an ordinary day. Today, the new regional director was arriving. A woman whose reputation already preceded her like a storm. He'd heard whispers in the elevator and murmurs in the cafeteria. "She's brilliant," they said, "sharp as glass, but with a smile that disarms the strongest of men." Arav had laughed it off, dismissing it as office exaggeration. Yet as he adjusted his tie in the mirrored wall and ran a hand through his neatly styled hair, he couldn't deny a tinge of anticipation pulsing beneath his calm exterior. He had spent years sculpting himself into perfection. The young executive everyone respected, disciplined, focused, immune to distractions. But destiny, that morning, was about to test the one thing he'd always prided himself on: control. At precisely 9:03 a.m., the elevator doors slid open. The soft chime seemed to echo longer than usual, and in that suspended silence, the room shifted. Heads turned, voices hushed, and even the air felt different. She stepped out. Wearing a midnight blue silk sari, the fabric shimmered with each subtle movement, flowing like water caught beneath moonlight. It wasn't a typical choice for the glass and steel world of corporate formality. It was elegance made flesh, a quiet rebellion against monotony. Her hair cascaded in soft, unhurried waves, framing a face that was neither cold nor overtly warm, but perfectly balanced, serene and powerful all at once. Her eyes, deep, unwavering, the color of roasted coffee, scanned the floor as if reading every soul before her. When her gaze briefly brushed over Arav, time faltered. He forgot his breath. The click of her heels against marble echoed like music that belonged to a different era. One where grace still had meaning, and power didn't need to shout. For a moment, Arav didn't see his new boss. He saw art. The murmurs returned only when she passed by, her perfume, a delicate blend of jasmine and cedar, lingering long enough to make his heart misstep. She reached the center of the lobby, where the management team waited, and extended her hand with effortless authority. "Good morning. I'm Anaya Kapoor." Her voice was smooth, like silk over stone, resonating with calm strength. The tone demanded respect, not through command, but through quiet confidence. And in that moment, Arav realized something unusual. Everyone else was nervous, but she wasn't. She belonged, not just to the room, but above it. He observed as she interacted, her words crisp, her smile deliberate, her posture flawless. Every gesture spoke of precision born from experience and grace that couldn't be taught. When she addressed him directly, "Mr. Arav Malhotra, isn't it? I've heard of your strategic pitch last quarter. Impressive." His composure cracked ever so slightly. "Thank you, Mom," he managed, but his tone betrayed him. There was admiration in it, and curiosity. Throughout the morning, Arav found his attention torn between his laptop screen and her presence. She moved through the office like a melody, gentle yet impossible to ignore. Her sari rustled faintly when she walked past his desk, a whisper of silk against the rhythm of his thoughts. It wasn't the attire itself that unsettled him, it was what it represented. In a world obsessed with conformity, she was fearless. Where others wore their authority in black suits and cold efficiency, she wrapped hers in grace and subtle rebellion. She didn't try to fit in. She made the space rise to her level. Later, during a team introduction, Arav caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass panel beside him. She was listening intently to another manager, one hand gently resting on the table. The sunlight filtered through the window, setting the fine embroidery of her sari aglow. Tiny golden threads catching fire in the morning light, and for an absurd moment, he thought, how can someone look both untouchable and human at the same time? When the meeting ended, she walked past him once again, pausing slightly as if sensing his gaze. Their eyes met, just for a heartbeat, and she smiled, faint but knowing. It wasn't flirtation. It was recognition, of curiosity, of unspoken questions, of something beginning. As the elevator doors closed behind her, the faint trail of her perfume lingered, wrapping around his senses like invisible silk. The office noise slowly returned, phones ringing, keyboards clattering. But for Arav, something had shifted. He leaned back in his chair, heart still unsteady, realizing that the morning had rewritten something inside him. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It was intrigue, fascination, and an awareness that she carried a story, one that wasn't meant to be ordinary. And though he didn't know it yet, that single glance, born from silk, scent, and silence, would become the axis on which his heart would quietly turn. Days turned into weeks, yet the memory of that first meeting lingered in Arav's mind like a soft, haunting melody that refused to fade. Every time Anaya Kapoor walked into the room, time seemed to slow, not dramatically, but subtly, like the world itself leaned closer to listen. The office was a theater of glass and light, reflections, glances, whispers, and within that modern labyrinth, something unspoken began to take shape between them. It wasn't loud nor reckless. It was quiet, deliberate, and dangerously beautiful. Arav was careful, always respectful, always professional, but his heart had developed a rhythm that only responded to her presence. The way she adjusted her glasses while reading reports, the faint crease on her forehead when she concentrated, the serene calm she carried even in chaos, these small fragments became the architecture of his fascination. Anaya, on her part, noticed things too, things she never intended to. The precision of his work, the quiet confidence in his voice during presentations, and the way he listened, not just to her words, but to the pauses between them. There was a day, one of those long corporate evenings when the city outside had already surrendered to dusk. Most of the staff had left, leaving behind the soft hum of computers and the distant glow of streetlights. Arav was finalizing a report when her voice broke the silence. "You're still here." He looked up to find her leaning against the glass partition, her silhouette framed by the twilight. She wore a soft gray sari tonight, simple yet impossibly elegant, her hair loosely tied, strands escaping like whispers of rebellion. "Just finishing the quarterly analysis," he replied, smiling faintly. "Couldn't leave it incomplete." She walked closer, her heels muted against the carpet. "You remind me of someone I used to be," she said, her tone almost wistful. "Before I learned that perfection doesn't always win. But balance does." Arav looked at her, surprised by the vulnerability beneath her words. "And what did you lose to learn that?" She paused, her gaze drifting to the city lights. "A version of myself," she whispered. "One that believed emotions could be silenced for ambition." In that moment, their eyes met. Two souls standing at different stages of the same journey. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was electric, filled with a language neither had to speak. From that night on, something shifted. Their conversations became more than work. They shared coffee during late deadlines, exchanged subtle smiles in crowded meetings, and often found excuses to linger a little longer after everyone had gone. It wasn't love, not yet. It was a gravitational pull, gentle but unstoppable, the kind that begins as curiosity and quietly evolves into craving. Sometimes during team discussions, she would catch him looking at her. Not inappropriately, but as if he were studying light itself, trying to understand how it bends. And though she never admitted it, she liked the way his attention made her feel seen. Not as a director, not as a boss, but as a woman who still carried warmth beneath her armor. One evening, after a long conference, rain began to fall, soft, hesitant at first, then torrential. The office emptied quickly, but Arav stayed, waiting out the storm. From her corner office, Anaya watched the rain drape itself over the glass walls, each droplet shimmering like liquid stars. She walked out, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. "You shouldn't be working through a storm," she said with a teasing smile. He looked up, surprised, and chuckled softly. "Neither should you." They sat across from each other, the city lights blurred by rain, and for a brief moment, the office didn't feel like an office at all. It felt like another world, suspended between professionalism and something far more human. She asked him about his dreams, he asked her about her past. The conversation flowed like the rain outside, effortless, cleansing, endless. When she laughed, really laughed, he realized it was the first time he'd heard it. It wasn't the poised laughter of authority, but the gentle, musical sound of someone momentarily free. And in that sound, something inside him broke open. When the rain softened and silence returned, Anaya set her cup down and looked at him with a softness that could undo empires. "You should go home, Arav," she said gently. He nodded but didn't move. "And if I don't want to?" Her eyes lingered on his, searching, questioning, then retreating. "Then you'll make things harder for both of us," she murmured, rising slowly. She walked away, her reflection fading in the glass. And yet that night, neither of them truly left. The echoes of that rain-soaked silence followed them home, wrapping around their thoughts like invisible silk. The next morning, she was back to her composed self, crisp, poised, untouchable. But Arav noticed something different. The way her gaze lingered on him a moment too long. The way her voice softened when addressing him. It was subtle, invisible to others, but impossible for him to miss. The chemistry between them had found its own rhythm, a silent melody that played beneath the surface of every meeting, every conversation, every unspoken word. It was not meant to be seen, only felt. And as their story unfolded in glances and stolen moments, both began to realize, some of the most powerful connections are not built in words, but in silence that dares to hold meaning. There are emotions that arrive quietly, like sunlight filtering through curtains, and there are those that burn their way into existence, leaving everything changed. Between Arav and Anaya, the line that once defined professionalism had begun to blur, melting slowly into the intoxicating warmth of something neither dared to name. It wasn't sudden, it was a slow unraveling, a gradual surrender of restraint, moment by moment, glance by glance. In the office they remained composed, meetings continued. Reports were discussed, deadlines were met, but underneath the rhythm of routine, a secret pulse beat, wild and uncontained. Whenever she entered a room, Arav's world narrowed to the sound of her voice, the scent of her perfume, the brush of her hand as she passed him a document. Every small encounter felt loaded, like electricity trapped beneath glass. One late afternoon, she called him into her office for a private discussion. The sun was low, painting the room in amber and gold. Her desk was scattered with papers, her hair tied loosely, a few rebellious strands grazing her cheek. "Close the door, please," she said softly. He obeyed, trying not to let his pulse betray him. I've reviewed your proposal, she continued, her tone professional. It's sharp, insightful, but a little too bold for the board. You need to learn balance, Arav, to temper passion with patience. He smiled faintly. Is that advice or a warning? For the first time she hesitated. Their eyes met, and something in the air thickened, like the pause before a storm. Maybe both, she said quietly. He stepped closer, not out of arrogance, but out of the magnetic pull neither could deny. You always tell me to stay composed, he said. But what if composure is the very thing I'm losing every time I'm near you? Her breath caught, a fleeting crack in her carefully built armor. You don't know what you're saying. I do, he whispered. I've tried to ignore it. I've tried to be who I should be. But every time I see you, I forget the rules. Anaya turned away, walking to the window. Outside, the city glowed, silver lights scattered across the skyline. Her reflection trembled in the glass, torn between reason and feeling. You can't say things like that, she murmured. Not to me. Not here. Then tell me to stop. He said, his voice low, steady. She didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. The room felt alive, charged with everything unsaid. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner and the beating of two hearts pretending not to hear each other. When she finally turned back to face him, her eyes held a storm, equal parts defiance and desire. You're playing with fire, Arav. He smiled softly. Maybe I already got burned the moment you walked into my life. She didn't respond, but something flickered in her gaze. The acknowledgement of truth. She moved past him, the faint scent of her perfume lingering, and placed a file on his desk. We'll speak about this project tomorrow, she said, her tone calm again, though her hand trembled slightly. But as she walked away, their fingers brushed, a moment that lasted too long, too deep. It wasn't touch, it was a confession. That night Arav didn't sleep. Her voice, her presence, her restraint. It all looped through his mind like a melody he couldn't silence. And somewhere across the city, in her quiet apartment overlooking the skyline, Anaya stood by her window, wine glass in hand, thinking of him. She hated herself for it, for letting her heart wander into forbidden territory. She had built her success on discipline, on walls high enough to keep emotions out. Yet here was this man, younger, ambitious, kind, breaking through every defense she'd ever built, not with force, but with sincerity. The next morning, she arrived at work earlier than usual, hoping distance would cure what closeness had ignited. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. Arav was already there, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired but unwavering. Good morning, she greeted curtly. Morning, he replied, his voice gentle but heavy with what was unspoken. The day moved in stolen moments, a brush of hands while passing documents, eyes meeting during a presentation, her voice catching ever so slightly when he spoke. The office became a silent battleground of restraint and longing. And then came the evening that changed everything. They stayed late again. Another urgent meeting, another excuse fate offered. The storm outside mirrored the one between them, thunder rumbling in the distance, rain pelting against the glass walls. She stood by the window, arms folded, staring out into the storm. He approached quietly, the reflection of lightning flickering across their faces. Why are you so afraid to feel? He asked softly. She turned sharply. Because feeling ruins everything, she whispered. Because the moment I let go, I lose control, and I can't afford that, not again. He stepped closer, his voice barely a breath. Then maybe control isn't what you need. Maybe what you need is honesty. For a moment she looked at him, truly looked, and the mask of authority shattered. There was fear, yes, but also the kind of yearning that could break worlds. When he reached out, his hand hovered near her face, not touching, just close enough to let her choose. She didn't move away. Her eyes fluttered shut, her breath trembled, and in that silence, the storm outside seemed to bow to the one within. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. It was the moment before one, more dangerous than the act itself. And when she finally whispered, "You shouldn't be here," her tone was neither command nor rejection. It was a plea, to him, to herself, to the walls that were already falling. He smiled faintly. Then why does it feel like this is exactly where I'm meant to be? Her answer was silence. The kind that only two hearts drowning in forbidden love can understand. The night of the annual company gala arrived with the promise of celebration. Champagne, soft lights, and the illusion of control. For everyone else, it was another evening of networking and polite laughter. But for Arav and Anaya, it was a storm waiting to unfold beneath crystal chandeliers and whispered music. The ballroom glimmered under a ceiling of chandeliers, each crystal catching the light like frozen stars. Waiters floated through the crowd with glasses of golden liquid, and a live orchestra played something slow, something haunting. The atmosphere was drenched in luxury, the kind that hides 1,000 secrets behind flawless smiles. Arav entered in a tailored black suit, his tie slightly loosened, his eyes scanning the crowd, searching, though he'd never admit for whom. Every heartbeat echoed louder than the music. And then, she appeared. Anaya Kapoor descended the marble staircase like time had slowed to honor her. She wore an emerald green silk gown, flowing effortlessly around her frame, each fold shimmering under the light like liquid poetry. Her hair was left loose, cascading down her shoulders, and her diamond earrings glinted like dew on morning grass. For a moment, he forgot the world. Every conversation around him blurred into silence. Every light seemed to bow to her. The poised director he knew, calm, composed, unreachable, was gone. In her place stood a woman of breathtaking grace, and for the first time, Arav didn't see authority. He saw Anaya. When their eyes met across the crowd, the air tightened. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, professional to everyone else, but to him it was a confession, silent and sweet. "Good evening, Ms. Kapoor," he said as he finally approached her, his voice steady but threaded with emotion. She turned toward him, pretending calm. "Mr. Malhotra, I didn't expect you to arrive this early." "Neither did I," he replied. "But then again, I didn't expect to see you like this." Her brow arched subtly. "And how is that?" He smiled softly, like temptation dressed as elegance. Her laughter was quiet, restrained, but it betrayed her composure for a heartbeat. "Careful," she warned, her eyes glinting. "Flattery doesn't suit professionalism. Neither does honesty." He murmured, and she looked away, trying to hide the tremor in her breath. They moved through the crowd, exchanging polite greetings, but the distance between them was electric. It was as though every step, every glance, every accidental touch of their arms carried the weight of months of restrained affection. Then came the slow music, a waltz. Couples began to fill the dance floor, and before she could step away, Arav extended his hand. "One dance," he said softly. She hesitated, long enough for silence to answer for her. But when she finally placed her hand in his, it was not out of politeness. It was surrender. The orchestra played softly, violins weaving emotions the human heart could barely contain. They moved in rhythm, elegant, precise. But their eyes spoke in a language no one else could hear. Every step was a confession, every turn was defiance. "You shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, her gaze locked on his. "Then stop me," he whispered back. Her lips parted, but no words came. The scent of her perfume, the warmth of his hand against her back, the closeness. It was too much and not enough all at once. The world disappeared. The room, the lights, the people, they all faded into a blur of colors. It was just them. When the music slowed, he leaned in, his breath grazing her ear. "Tell me this means nothing, and I'll walk away." Her fingers tightened around his, betraying her restraint. "It can't mean anything," she whispered. "You know that." "Knowing," he said softly, "doesn't stop feeling." The final note of the song hung in the air like a held breath. She stepped back, breaking the connection, but her eyes, shimmering with something between tears and desire, refused to let go. Later that evening, he found her standing alone on the balcony. The city stretched before them, a sea of lights under an endless sky. The wind played with her hair, and the moonlight kissed her bare shoulders. He joined her, saying nothing. The silence between them was fragile, sacred. "Do you ever think about consequences?" she finally asked, her voice barely above the wind. "Every day," he answered, "and every day, I still choose to feel this." She turned to him, her eyes glistening. "You don't understand what you're risking." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I do. But tell me, Anaya, what are you risking by pretending you don't feel it too?" Her breath trembled. For a moment she looked away, as if trying to hold back everything threatening to spill. Then she whispered, "You make it hard to be who I have to be." He stepped closer, his voice a promise. "Then be who you want to be. Just for tonight." The distance between them vanished, slowly, reverently, until their foreheads rested together, eyes closed, hearts trembling in sync. It wasn't a kiss, it was the confession before it, the quiet, fragile truth of two souls finally colliding. In that fleeting moment, love didn't ask for permission. It simply existed, dangerous, beautiful, undeniable. The city below carried on, unaware that somewhere above, two hearts had just crossed a line they could never uncross. And when they finally stepped apart, it was not out of regret, but out of the silent understanding that nothing between them would ever be the same again. The morning after the gala arrived with cruel clarity. Sunlight spilled through the glass walls of Sterling Enterprises, revealing the usual rhythm of ambition, papers shuffling, voices rising, phones ringing. But beneath the polished hum of professionalism, something had shifted. Something delicate and dangerous now lived between Arav and Anaya, unspoken yet unmistakable. They hadn't kissed, they hadn't confessed in words, and yet, both knew that a line had been crossed, not in action, but in emotion. Their eyes avoided each other that morning, their voices careful, their smiles practiced. To the rest of the world, nothing had changed, but to them every glance carried the echo of that night, the dance, the whispers, the moment when their hearts had finally stopped pretending. For days they lived in that fragile balance, bound by duty, torn by desire. Arav poured himself into work, trying to bury what refused to die. Anaya, on the other hand, tried to rebuild her composure, but the more she distanced herself, the more his presence haunted her. One afternoon, a rumor began to circulate, whispers of favoritism, of a special connection between the new director and her young executive. It started small, a careless comment over coffee, but it spread like wildfire. In the world of corporate perfection, even a hint of impropriety was poison. When the board called her for a discussion, she knew the storm had arrived. That evening, as rain drizzled outside, Arav waited in her office. The room felt heavy with the scent of wet earth and tension. She entered quietly, closing the door behind her, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. "They're investigating," she said simply, setting her bag down. "They think I've compromised professional ethics." He stood abruptly. "Because of me." She looked at him then. Truly looked. Her eyes a mixture of love, pain, and unspoken goodbye. "Because of us?" The words fell between them like shattered glass. He took a step toward her, voice breaking. "Then I'll tell them the truth. That it's my fault. That I knew." Her tone was firm, but her eyes softened. "You'll do nothing of the sort. Anaya, they're blaming you for something you didn't do." She smiled faintly. "Didn't I?" she whispered. "Maybe I did. Maybe the moment I started looking at you differently, I crossed a line I swore I never would." He moved closer, desperation flickering in his gaze. "Then let them think what they want. We'll fight it." She shook her head slowly. "Arav, this company is your beginning. For me it was already a destination. I can rebuild from here, but you're still becoming. You can't let this shadow follow you." His throat tightened. "You're talking like you're already leaving." She didn't reply immediately. She walked to the window instead, watching the rain race down the glass, each drop falling fast only to disappear. "Sometimes," she said softly, "love isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go, before it destroys what's beautiful about it." He exhaled shakily. "And what about us?" Her voice trembled for the first time. "We were never us, Arav. We were a moment, rare, impossible, perfect in its imperfection. Some stories are not meant to last forever, they're meant to awaken what's real within us." She turned then, her eyes glistening, the glow of the city reflecting in them like fragments of heartbreak. "You made me remember what it feels like to feel again. And that's enough." He wanted to argue, to beg, to promise 1,000 impossible things. But as he looked at her, the woman who had taught him the meaning of quiet strength, he realized that love, real love, sometimes ends not with a kiss, but with understanding. The next day her resignation letter lay neatly on the boardroom table. No explanations, no drama, just dignity. When she walked out of the building for the last time, she didn't look back. But from the window of his office, Arav watched her, her figure framed by the silver rain, her emerald umbrella glinting like a memory. He wanted to run after her. He wanted to tell her that rules didn't matter, that careers were replaceable but hearts were not. Yet he stayed. Because somewhere deep inside he knew. Her leaving wasn't the end of love, it was its highest expression. Weeks passed, the office moved on. New projects, new people, new gossip. But for Arav time moved differently. He worked harder than ever, driven not by ambition, but by the echo of her belief in him. Years later he stood in the same office, no longer the young executive, but the new regional director. Her old title, her old chair, The same skyline stretched before him, glittering with the same city lights she once stared at in silence. On the shelf near his desk sat a single item, a framed photograph of that year's gala. The two of them captured mid-dance, unaware of the camera. Her eyes half lowered, his smile uncertain, the world around them fading into blur. He would look at it sometimes, not with regret, but with a quiet ache that had learned to become gratitude. Because what they shared wasn't failure. It was a rare kind of love. The kind that doesn't demand to be possessed to be real. And whenever he saw a woman in a midnight blue sari, walking through the corridors of another dream, he would feel that familiar pull in his chest. The memory of silk, rain, and unspoken promises. She had taught him the most beautiful truth of all: love, when it is pure, does not need to last forever. It only needs to be real, once. Welcome back to Veiled Narrative Stories, where every heartbeat hides a story, and every silence holds a secret. This tale was never just about a man meeting his new boss. It was about two souls colliding in a world that told them not to feel. About attraction disguised as admiration, about love that grew in the shadow of duty. Arav saw in Anaya what every man dreams of: grace, intelligence, and a strength so elegant it made the world stop. But he also saw her walls, the invisible boundaries of professionalism and pain. And still he dared to feel. Anaya, on the other hand, had mastered control, until one moment of vulnerability changed everything. In his eyes she found something she'd long buried: tenderness. In his presence she remembered she was still capable of love. But love in its truest form doesn't always end in togetherness. Sometimes it ends in sacrifice. Sometimes walking away is the purest way of staying. She left, not because she didn't love him, but because she loved him too much to let the world destroy what they had. And he stayed, not because he'd moved on, but because her belief in him became the compass of his future. Years passed, the world changed, but one photograph, a dance under chandeliers and stolen glances, remained frozen in time, a reminder that some moments don't need forever to be eternal. Love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. It lives in the pause between words, in the rain falling softly on glass, in the space between two people who once dared to care too much. Because true love isn't about possession. It's about transformation. It's about leaving someone better than you found them, even if it means never touching them again. And that is what makes this story unforgettable. So when you meet someone who changes the rhythm of your heartbeat, remember, not every connection is meant to last a lifetime. Some are meant to awaken the soul, just once. This was Veiled Narrative Stories, where emotions are veiled, but never forgotten. Until next time, keep your heart open and your stories alive.